You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by...
Chrissy Mancini-Nichols.
Hey, Chrissy. How are you doing?
Great, Jeff. How are you? I'm so excited to be back.
Yes, welcome back. Welcome back.
Yeah.
It's good to have you. What have you been up to? We haven't chatted in a little while, and I know you've been so busy with work because you're doing some amazing projects around the country. What have you been up to?
Yeah, just like we were a lot of projects. Everything that from building transit microgrids and resiliency hubs to e-cargo bikes and planning for zero emissions loading, like just a wide range of projects. I'm hiring. If anyone's interested, please contact me.
You'll get a couple emails, I bet.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, interesting, cool work. I mean, it's keeping me up at night for sure, but it's exciting. So it's exciting to see just what's going on. I have some federal work, but it's mostly state and local, just what's going on in the local communities are pushing for and states are funding and all the action that's happening. So I think we're only going to see more of that.
You're on the forefront of a lot of this stuff. I'm wondering if there's something like new that you've learned, because you do so many projects on these cool subjects. I'm wondering if there's anything new and interesting that's like, oh, wow, this is actually interesting. And I did not know this before.
Well, with the transit microgrids, I've really been learning more about just energy policy overall in the grid network. And in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's this huge discussion around hydrogen as an energy storage. And I was just talking about that last week. I'm just learning so much. And we were talking earlier today about electric vehicle charging plants and things like that. And my career has taken so many turns. It's just interesting now that it's like transit and transportation and energy. And I really think there's always been the connection, but now it's all about sustainability. And we've always pushed for this for so long. How do we continue to push for that nexus of transportation and real sustainability, not just a bunch of electric vehicle cars?
Yes, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah,
that's interesting. The hydrogen. I have one of my best friends from high school. Actually, he works for a renewable energy company, and he was talking about he does hydrogen stuff. And it's interesting to hear him talk about, I had no idea how hydrogen was created or made or anything like that. And obviously it's something they use a lot of fossil fuels to do before. And now apparently you can do it with solar, as long as you have electricity, you can create hydrogen. But if you can do it with solar instead of with fossil fuels, it's actually really green. And so there's like all the process for creating it and things like that. So there's a whole wide world of interesting things that are happening in the energy sector that are outside of my expertise, but it's interesting to hear that you're looking into those things.
Yeah, and that's what we're figuring out. If we're storing energy, what is the best storage? Is it hydrogen? Is it something else? And just like all those little details, when you start to get into how these things are actually going to work in real life, I'm just learning a ton. So I'm excited for all these projects, and to eventually in a year, we'll have so much more to talk about. We're probably in 6 months even. So.
Oh, I'm sure, especially with all this investment happening.
Yeah. Or even like we were working on this e-cargo bike loading zone program. We're just starting out, and you have to think about, well, how many hills are in a city? All these little things. How are delivery drivers, like, where's their hub? How do they pick them up? It's just, they pay? How do you keep cars out of the zones that the e-cargo bike's going? Do they go on the bike? Do they ride in the bike lane? Like all these details. It's fun to figure out how this is going to work in real life. So.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. You're going to come on the show and share that, right?
Yeah. And that will be a quick project. So
good. Awesome. Well, we're going to dive into all things Investment Reduction Act today on this episode and try to break a few things down if we can. It's so huge and there's so many pieces. I'm sure we'll only scratch the surface on it. But I hope this is informative for folks who might have seen that this happened and maybe paid attention to like one part of it and then maybe not some others. But hopefully we can bring some of that to this discussion. I'm hoping. I know Chrissy will. I don't know if
You will.
I don't know how much
You read more than anyone.
Well, I just want to say also, let's get to a couple of advertisements here before we get started. Because we cover so many books, I've mentioned last time we partnered with Bookshop as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. We love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on and help keep us interviewing them, that would be tremendous. All the books we've ever discussed are in our shop, bookshop.org/shop/the Overhead Wire, bookshop.org/shop/the Overhead Wire. Oh my gosh. I'll just replace that one with that. Wow.
Bookshop.org
bookshop.org/shop/the Overhead Wire. Actually, there's been a number of purchases on Bookshop from our store, and the most popular one is Bike Lanes Are White Lanes. And I think that's really interesting that was the most popular book that's being purchased through the store multiple times, folks.
Wow.
So if folks want that one or any other book that we've talked about on Talking Headways, feel free to get those. I think that's really interesting. We've talked to so many people lately. Michael Newman, Sustainable Infrastructure for Cities and Societies, is one of my favorites recently. I went into the book thinking that it was just going to be about infrastructure, but it's actually about urban planning and cities. And I really, and I mentioned this on the last time was talking about it on Mondays, but I really think his cover is horrible. And he should have done way better with it, because it's just like this lorry driving through, I think it's in the UK. It's like driving through this corridor of a highway, and it has two windmills in the background, and it's like, sustainable infrastructure. And I was like, this has nothing to do with what's within the book. This is horrible. I feel like there's got to be some truth in advertising there that it'd be better. So if folks get a chance, that I highly recommend that one too. If you get a chance to go to bookshop.org.
The cover draws people in. You have to.
I know, right? And it's like so kind of boring and droll, but it is what it is. I think it's the company, the publishing company's fault as much too. So this is episode 115. We're in session. Again, you can listen to the show on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Subscribe in your podcatcher of choice so you get the podcast every week. Okay, let's get into this. So, as you know, usually we go through the top items from the Overhead Wire every week. For the last 3 weeks, there's been a lot of really cool stuff, and perhaps we'll talk about that next week or the week after. But this week, because tomorrow is signing day, for the Inflation Reduction Act, formerly known as BBB. We're going to go and talk about this. And so this is hashtag IRA, I guess, is how people are labeling it on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's so weird, especially if you grew up with I'm surprised something got done, but in the end, I read somewhere that Joe Manchin didn't want to be known as the person who killed the planet. So I think Chuck Schumer said that somewhere. And so after he killed BBB for the umpteenth time, apparently his conscience got to him or something, even though there's a lot of stuff from him.
He got a lot of
stuff that he wanted, and including a vote for some permitting thing, permitting for his oil and gas stuff and coal. So we'll see if that actually happens or not. I know that's something that in the future, and then they did pass it with, I guess, that to the next reading or something with Republican support. But so interesting enough. So like I said, it'll go to Joe Biden's desk tomorrow, I believe, after the Friday vote in the House passed. So I've read a number of places where there's different amounts of money being thrown around about how much this actually is, especially over the timeline that it's implemented for. So I've seen $790 billion. I've seen $1.2 trillion over the lifetime of the bill. It's obviously nowhere near the $3 trillion that the BBB Act would have been, but it's something.
Well, it also depends on the tax credits and who takes advantage of them. So that's impossible to know right now.
Yeah, that's true. And then a lot of so in terms of like raising money, there's a lot of there's 15% corporate minimum tax for big companies. There's a tax on stock buybacks from corporations instead of a carried interest loophole because Kristen Sinema wanted that. There's there's also
amazing. Like
I know it's crazy how they're like, oh, let's just flip this in and out and we're good.
we're just like I can have anything I want, and this is
And this
whatever.
is what yeah, exactly. If I can have anything I want, this is what I'm asking for. I mean, she must be getting paid after she's done, or maybe even now. And then there's also IRS compliance for catching high value tax cheats. No, the IRS is not coming to your house and taking your money.
No, and the hiring. There's been this outcry over the number of IRS workers are hiring, but it's like replacing people that will retire. It's not
Right.
There could be some better messaging around that.
Yeah, and it's also for like technology stuff. There's also going to be like a simpler way to file your taxes too. Even after forever, TurboTax and Intuit and others have lobbied against a simple tax filing software from the IRS because they already have most people's W-2s and all that stuff. It's not like you have to, and paying TurboTax like $60 or whatever every year it seems dumb for a lot of these folks. I mean, I do because I small business and I have a lot of tax breaks and Schedule C's and all that stuff. But for somebody who just gets a W-2, it seems ridiculous that you have to pay to do TurboTax because they know the IRS knows they know how much you get. So it seems silly. But so there's going to be money from that too in terms of making money. Okay, so with that being said, there's three themes that I want to talk to you about. There's transportation and related urban policy. There's energy savings through like retrofits and things like that. And then there's the natural environment benefits from this. There's all kinds of others. There's prescription drugs and whatever else. And we're not going to talk about that because that's not what this show is about.
But I mean, it's great. It's 3 million people won't lose healthcare. So.
Right, exactly. There's that. And then there's insulin on Medicare and things like that. Hopefully they do it for private plans as well later on. But there's all kinds of other good things in here. But then, we focus on certain topics. So I want to start out first also by saying that the bill is frustrating from a standpoint of an active transportation supporter. There's obviously a lot of tax credits for electric vehicles and things like that. There's a lot that I would like to do in the future for infrastructure bills or whatever else, but I want to make that caveat ahead of time before people think that we're gushing over a bill that has been frustrating over the urban density, housing, those types of things. I mean, the BBB bill would have had a lot for like public housing. There would have been a lot for urban transportation. There would have been a lot for connectivity.
But really, there's zero because it was never going to pass.
Exactly, but it didn't pass, and so it's not in there. So with that being said, let's I guess dive into like what's in here. And so from the transportation perspective, the first thing that sets us off is the $3 billion neighborhood access and equity grants. And this is extension of the Reconnecting Communities program. So there's a $1 billion from the infrastructure bill in that program. And now there's $3 billion more. So that's interesting. And
of that $3 billion, $1.1 billion is specifically for economically disadvantaged communities.
Right. So to qualify for that funding, the areas must have an anti-displacement policy, community land trust, or community advisory board in effect, as well as plans to employ local residents making improvements, which I think is really cool that they were able to kind of pull that in.
And it seems like when you think about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so much of that was written by Republicans. And I feel like with the Reconnecting Communities or this neighborhood access and equity grants, you cannot use the money for any projects that will add more travel lanes to roads. So that alone that's $3 billion that will be funding the programs that we care about.
Right, exactly. So covering a highway, turning a highway into a boulevard, adding trails and bike lanes, installing sound barriers, providing better connections to transit, green infrastructure to handle storm runoff, reducing urban heat island hotspots, and building safety features and curbing air pollution. This is all in Route 50 in an article by Dan Vogt, so talking about all the things that this specific program will go to. I think that, it's interesting. There was actually an article also in, I can't remember if it was Route 50 or if it was governing, but I think it was governing, where, Patrick Kennedy from Dallas was talking about I-345 and how it's kind of a, that's the type of project that this program is supposed to support, but it's been getting pushback from TxDOT, who says, 19,000 trips a day are going to be impacted by this highway removal if you do it. And so we can't, in good conscience as tech engineers, do that to the humans of Dallas, Fort Worth, which is silly ultimately. But that's kind of the roadblocks that some of these programs have to go up against when they want to do something good, like reconnecting communities with the $1 billion or the $3 billion for this new program. Those are kind of the hard parts. Trying to get politically, you can get the money, but then politically trying to get it actually done, which they've been trying to do for a decade now. It feels like it's going to be a hard part of some of these programs moving forward.
Yeah, and when there are those strict requirements that you can't add travel lanes, then you can tell the engineers have nothing
That's
opposed to
true.
engineers, but they don't have that argument to make anymore. So I think what we'll see between the billion in the infrastructure bill, this 3 billion, I know we want more, but this is going to provide so many learnings for how this can actually work. I think it's going to be a roadmap for future investment. And then you combine that, because if you think about where a lot of this funding is going to go, disadvantaged communities, communities obviously that are built along highways, and then you consider all the other money there for electrifying port infrastructure, so that will improve air quality in the very similar neighborhoods. Tax credits for electric trucks, that's going to improve air quality, especially around communities with high. So it just all builds on each other. So while I'm going to put in quotes, only 3 billion, it's layered with all this other billions that will really make a difference.
Yeah, and I think something we learned from the Obama years, especially with the Sustainable Communities program, was that, which was put together with the EPA, the DOT, and HUD. They did these sustainable communities grants, and I think that from that, there were a small amount of pots of money, but then they learned so much from those programs about what is good and what is bad, and what works and what doesn't work. And I think you're right that this is kind of going to mimic that, in the sense that once they kind of figure out which part of this actually works and which part of this doesn't, there might actually be some improvements down the road. And when they're giving out maybe even more money in another infrastructure bill that comes out, especially among the environmental justice, protocols and things like that. I mean, you see this in, places all over the U.S., but in Southern California, I know that there's the mapping program that USC has done to look at those communities and how they're impacted by environmental justice issues. And you can actually target specifically based on, impacted communities. And so those types of mapping programs and those types of targeted investments are actually very helpful, in the sense that once you figure out how to do it, then you can do it systemically over in the long term, once you figure out the initial mechanism.
Yeah, and in fact, I've written and received almost 7 million now in grants in those disadvantaged areas that the mapping, like SB 535 in California, because it's a disadvantaged area. So the point of the grant is to figure out if it can work here, how does it work here? And then if it can work here, how can we, do something statewide or nationwide? So these programs, they really put the path, they set the path for all future investments. So this 3 billion is going to reverberate through the years.
This is just for transportation. I mean, there's $60 billion for environmental justice initiatives, including $3 billion worth of block grants for communities historically harmed by pollution. So there's even more money for like just that scanning process and figuring that out as well. So the transportation is one part, but then there's this whole other pot of money for those types of things too. And so, as you mentioned also, and this is coming from the Smart Growth America post on specifically on this subject, there's going to be AQ monitoring. They're going to have, be able to monitor the dangerous pollution from trucks and buses and ports, like you said. And there's $100 million for community-led air quality monitoring, which helps identify overburdened communities, improves polluter accountability, and increases transparency. So this piece was specifically taken from the Georgetown Climate Center tweet. I think that you might have read the thread that I sent you. And then there's there's all kinds of other stuff too. There's $2 billion for Federal Highway Administration grants to states and local governments and MPO for low carbon transportation materials like cement and steel. Hard to solve piece of the, it's a really hard piece of the construction and the life cycle costs of these transportation projects, is thinking about how are you going to construct this without going into like a carbon deficit, because cement is very carbon intensive at the moment. We posted an article yesterday where somebody's coming up with a really cool algae based replacement for lime, which lime kilns are the things that come up with like a lot of emissions. So there's technology also. I think there's money in here also for like those types of interventions and also the research for them too. So there's all kinds of things that are coming specifically for transportation, but also the environmental quality stuff for the disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, and that's a great point about the research to do this. And a lot of this technology, we just have to figure out like how to do it. Like what is the replacement for cement? What like how do you scale that? How do you bring that to production? So, it is a lot of money for research, but if, otherwise there's just no way to decarbonize most of the materials we use.
Yeah, and you mentioned when we mentioned hydrogen earlier, and green hydrogen and how that's created. I mean, they're working on stuff for steel too, where you can actually, steel requires a huge amount of heat to actually produce. So there's those types of interventions and the research that goes with that to try to do that for cement and steel and all those things that are needed for, and hopefully even plastics and things that obviously get used in transportation too, which is pretty crazy amount of fossil fuels that are used now for it. But it's really interesting. There's also more on the list of things that are happening. It's crazy. It's so much in here. There's so much in here. It's a little bit overwhelming if I'm being honest.
It's like they just said a billion here. Like you get
a billion. Right. You get like Oprah. Like you get a billion. You get a billion. So there's $100 million to identify and label low carbon materials and products for federally funded transportation and building projects. There's also $250 million to develop and standardize environmental product declarations for construction materials. So that means that when I guess an idea for what that means is like when you go to the gas pump and some states are actually starting to put like this, you're going to emit this much greenhouse gas emissions if you look at it on the pump. So it's got and there's going to be labels. So it's like going to the grocery store and you're like, oh, this has so many calories. It's like this has so many, so many emissions. So they're actually, 250 million to standardize those types of labels for this. So it's really interesting to see that happening too.
Well, so much about changing people's minds and habits is about education and perception and just giving them that knowledge. So that, can make a dent in even a small change would be
right. And if there's a benefit from you go to the catalog and you say, oh, this one is less carbon, and you actually, one of the good things is that as a company, if you're going to go and purchase materials and things, you can actually advertise that you're a green contractor or whatever it is, because you have the numbers. If you didn't have the numbers, then you couldn't say, oh, well, I'm saving this much energy from doing this way versus this way. So hopefully in the future, people will come up with like ways to advertise themselves as the way, as the move forward. I think that's going to be important. Okay, let's get to electric vehicles, shall we? So EV tax credits. So this bill extends the current $7,500 tax credit for new vehicles, as well as a $4,000 tax credit off of a used EV. It also gets rid of the current cap that cuts automakers off tax credits after they've sold 200,000 EVs. And it's written so buyers can get an immediate discount at the dealership instead of waiting weeks or months for their tax credit to come through. This was part of CNN's reporting on this. There is a caveat, though, like they say.
Big one.
A big caveat. So people won't likely be able to take advantage of this for a little while because Manchin actually put into the bill specifically because he, for some reason, was not a fan of Chinese rare earth metal mining. And they're kind of, I guess they're not monopoly, but they have a large part of the supply chain related to that. So basically, he's made it so that these car companies that want to build electric vehicles, they have to source their materials from other places that are not on a list of, what's the name of it?
Free trade,
free trade countries or something along those lines, right? I can't remember the name of it.
Free trade agreements, yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually going to make an interesting dent into this tax credit. And some people are worried about whether it actually work or not.
Well, I don't see how it would. So right now, I think only 25 vehicles would be eligible for the credit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it would require electric vehicles by 2024 to have batteries made with at least 40% minerals that are processed from countries that we have a free trade agreement with. Like that is impossible. Then that increases to 80% by 2027. But the battery components have to be a requirement that they're 100% mined in countries we have free trade agreements with. So basically, Russia, China, Congo, those are places that mine these lithium, cobalt, graphite, nickel. Like we don't mine those products in the US. I don't see how we would get that supply chain going in a year and a half. So that's why I don't understand how people will take advantage of this tax credit. And maybe
I
that was
think
the
it. I
point.
think that's the point. I
That's
think
the
they
point.
won't for a
Yeah.
little while, at least until the supply chain stuff gets fixed. And that means more mining in the U.S., which is
Yeah, so
environmentally, or Canada, for example. I think there's a lot of stuff in Canada. We just had actually Paris Marx on the show to talk about his book Road to Nowhere, which criticizes technology companies and transportation. And one of the chapters in his book is very vivid about the kind of the environmental degradation as well as human rights issues that come with mining, especially in Congo and other places, as well as for lithium specifically, the way to mine it now. And part of the research and technology is going to have to be how do we mine or take lithium from recycling the existing batteries that we have, or B, figuring out a way to do it without using so much water. I think there's a water component in the lithium mining that's a big problem, and it's actually creating problems in the South American countries that are trying to corner the market in lithium, because there's a couple of them down there that have significant resources in that area. But it's interesting to think about that all the things that come from mining and the problems with it. And so, it might have to be that, the United States and Canada pick up the slack in terms of how much they're producing, but at the same time, that might be also a negative. And I think that's part of the problem with all of this discussion about electric vehicles generally, is that when you produce these trucks that are so huge, the Hummers, et cetera, you need infinitely larger amounts of lithium to create a battery that will allow them to go so far and so fast. And ultimately, that's just a vanity thing. It's not necessary. You don't necessarily need it. There's an article, I think, David Zipper wrote an article today in Slate about the neighborhood electric vehicle, the golf carts.
Yeah.
And to get a lot of people in this, I guess, Peachtree City in Georgia drive their golf carts to the stores and stuff instead of their regular cars.
I have cities asking me for parking requirements for golf carts like all the time. It is a thing. Yeah.
Which as compared to like an 8-ton Hummer, that's actually a reduction in the amount of mining that needs to happen to get the batteries for those golf carts. So those are things that need to be discussed in terms of the sustainability of this all. Also, we've heard from the Rocky Mountain Institute and others that you need to actually reduce VMT over time if we're going to get climate benefits out of a transportation system. Otherwise, even if we have all EVs, it's still going to cause problems. Specifically, I'm guessing from mining and from just the increases in pollution from other materials, including the brake dust and the rubber tires and all those things.
Well, there are two things. One, do we have the workforce that wants to mine these minerals in the US? We have a huge worker shortage right now. So I don't think that, that's possible to grow our workforce to complete this requirement to have this mining in a few years. And then the other thing is, like we're funding all of these components or, all the vehicles, and there is money there in the bill. I think it's 2 billion to retrofit auto plants so they can make electric vehicles. There's money to support this Made in America battery sector. But like you're saying, I've really been getting into this, the size of the battery, how often the batteries need to be replaced, how far down, so like you can't deplete your battery, you never really want it to go below 50%. Like what's the charging infrastructure that's going to support that? And there's a lot of funding for charging infrastructure right now, but there's issues with the funding for the charging infrastructure. But then the other thing is, does the grid support this? I have several cities that have these huge EV requirements for new parking, and it's one, adding tons of costs to build housing is, you have all these EV requirements. But two, I just asked, well, what happened if everyone plugged in at the same time? Like you would, break the biggest, it's not going to work. So I think we also need to step back. And what we've done is study the grid to understand where is the grid capable, where are there deficiencies, like how do you work with PG&E to upgrade the grid? Well, how do you work with PG&E to start? But then, to upgrade the grid. And then like we're just funding all this capital again, but not the operations. Like, and for transit agencies, you think, well, if we're requiring electric or battery electric buses, and there's still a big cost to that. It's not like the transit agencies, sure, they're saving on fuel, but they still have to pay these huge energy bills every month. So there's like this disconnect between what we're funding on the capital side, and then of course not funding operations or like planning and policy that goes behind it.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like you hear all about the need, if you're a large agency too, if you're going to have to switch over to fully electric buses, the infrastructure for that, the bus barn retrofits, the amount of electricity you have to put it. There was
just the amount of planning to figure out how did your service change.
Yeah, and I think that's what's been frustrating too for a lot of folks. And I wrote about this in my newsletter the other day. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, the governor, actually, the other day, the folks at Transit Matters and others in the Boston region have come up with a really great electrification plan for their commuter rail, their regional rail, and plans to connect everything together as a system, kind of like in Philadelphia and other places around the world. And the governor just kind of wrote in the recent bill that's like, oh, let's do battery electric locomotives. And it's like, that's a totally unproven technology compared to what we know from around the world with overhead catenaries. Now, I'm biased because I'm call myself the overhead wire. However, like it's like, we are also going down this route of deciding that battery electric vehicles is the best way to go. And we have a proven 100-year-old way to actually electrify through overhead wires. Now, the complaints are always they're unsightly. They're, the maintenance people at Muni and others don't like them. But I always say that, my lungs don't care about your visual aesthetic. But like, there's also a problem with, we think too futuristically sometimes in trying to make these, we have the tools already to actually make these changes, but we choose not to do it because it's hard or it's frustrating, or we think that the new technology is going to be the better way to go, even though it's not proven.
Yeah, and when it comes to battery electric buses, like first they're only really manufactured to be huge buses, like 40 footers, so or bigger. So that limits a lot of agencies because they need 23 footers or 30 footers. And then the battery's so big that takes up a lot of room. But then there also is the issue with when you have a battery electric bus, the battery sometimes prohibits the bus from being ADA compliant. So you just run into a whole nother realm of issues that just makes it impossible. So, and then I receive, helped an agency receive funding for inductive charging. So like in route charging, because that's a way to keep the battery not deplete, going down to below 50 to 30%. It's just, there's so many details that go into this. But I think you're right. Like we are searching for these answers, and part of that in this bill, it's like, what are you searching for that we don't already know? I mean, we know walking and biking reduces emissions much more than electric vehicles will, but there's no funding for e-cargo bikes or.
Well, that's the other thing that I was about to get to is like the on the cutting room floor was $4 billion for a e-bike tax credit, and it would have been a $900 refundable credit. And, they got cut, I think in part because legislators just don't understand. They're like, oh, cars, it makes sense to us. We know this. It's a known entity. And I think this is a general problem with transportation planning generally in the United States, especially when it comes to transit versus roads. Roads have such they're so baked into the the systems of funding, the systems of design, the systems of state DOTs that, you say, oh, well, let's give you money for road. Then the money for road comes out, through the spigot to the construction company and gets done in a year. Well, here, let us give you money for bikes, or let's give you money for a transit expansion in Seattle, for example. And the money gets like, you go do your EIR, it takes 6 years, and it like the planning is slow, and it has to be bespoke because it's new, new for everybody that's doing it and working on it. And so, a project that would take the road builders like 5 years takes the transit builders 15 years, and then we're set behind 4 times because of the amount of, if you're lucky, yeah. And we're set behind even further because we didn't get the sustainable transportation project finished fast enough. And I think that's just a general problem. And the same thing with e-bikes, right? Like it would really, yeah. And I imagine it's probably a bigger city request for sustainable transportation, these e-bikes. But at the same time, like you're actually, if compared to the $7,500 credit, a $900 credit is a huge difference. And then that's what, how many 900 credits can you fit into 75? And I'm not done with math, but let's just say 7. So like, or 8. So basically you get 8 e-bikes out of and 1 electric vehicle. How much VMT are you saving with the 8 e-bikes versus the 1 large electric vehicle? It makes a lot of sense from a reduction in emission standpoint to invest in those types of technologies. However, it seems like the lawmakers don't quite get that math real quick.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they said e-bikes, we don't need that, cut it.
Yeah, they're just like, throw it out
Yeah.
in the trash.
Like they needed to get to a number, and that was no one. Joe Manchin has never.
No. He's
He
not the e-bike
he has a yacht,
saver.
He has like other lots
The
of
Maserati,
vehicles.
yeah, he doesn't care.
E-bikes, no, not so much.
No. The interesting thing also about the tax credit, basically is that I guess for SUVs and trucks and all that stuff, the limits are under $80,000 for a vehicle, as well as under $55,000, and they have income thresholds for the consumers too. So there's that part of that whole thing. But like I said, no e-bikes, those types of things. But then there's, I think you mentioned earlier, the electrification for ports and things like that. And there's also the $3 billion I think they put in there for electrifying the postal service vehicles, which they've been fighting over forever. So hopefully that happens too, because I look out the window at the postal vehicles that go down the street, and I'm like, oh, that would be nice if that was electric. I don't really like the design of the new ones. I'd rather have a Richard Scarry type of vehicle rather than one.
Yeah.
The Wisconsin Defense Company or whatever that designed is like, I don't know. I'm feeling like all these new EV makers, they have these like really like Arrival or what's the other one that's out there? There's another one. They look really cool. They look like they should be in cities. They look futuristic. They look like they belong. And then this one, it looks like somebody took out a Jeep from 1950 and said, hey, let's see how ugly we can make a postal car.
Maybe they wanted to be. I don't know.
Maybe they want it to be ugly so nobody steals them. Or I don't know.
Probably. Well, that's not a.
I guess it's not a bad.
Possibilities.
I guess that's not a bad idea. Okay. So the next kind of subject area that I want to talk about was energy savings. And I think this is basically a lot of stuff that, I'm going to be thinking about for my house.
Yeah.
Things that I will be focused on. There's a lot of things for like installing efficient ACs, water heaters, furnaces, other cooling and heating equipment. There's going to be tax credits for like 30% off of those things. And I think that's huge. There was a tweet the other day by somebody, I can't remember who, I apologize, but they did a 3-year chart of their energy savings from installing heat pumps in the house, and they saved like 50% or something like that in terms of energy from their gas furnace before. So I think if you can get those heat pumps, installed and make sure that there's a credit for those, that's going to be huge for people. So let's see here. Households would receive up to $600 for each piece of equipment, up to $1,200 total per year. There'd be a special credit for up to $2,000 for electric heat pumps, and credits could be used to upgrade breaker boxes as well if needed to handle the additional electric load.
Yeah, which is a big deal.
Right. So that's kind of like our previous discussion about updating stuff for the buses, right? For the electric buses. It's like you don't just need the bus, you need all of the. It's like when you buy an iPhone, you don't just buy the iPhone, you buy the charger too, right? And all the electrical stuff
and that's
that comes
where
with
like
it.
some people, they look at, oh, I want to do this, but then they start adding up all the other costs, and they're like, oh, I can't do that. But now they can.
Yeah.
And I think the other is the solar panels, the 30% of the cost to install purchase solar panels, which, that's a $20,000 expense for an average rooftop. That's a huge, huge credit.
Yeah, it's a huge credit.
And I'm just thinking about, we don't have them in the city, but the power shutoffs that we have in California, if
Oh
you have
yeah,
solar,
right.
then you don't have to deal with them.
Yeah, the rolling blackouts. If you
Yeah.
can get it to where you can. So I know that I think in some places where you do have solar, you have to have it so that it feeds into PG&E's grid, right? And so I think if there is a rolling blackout, sometimes it takes out your house, even if you have solar, because of the way that it's set up. And if you have to like set it up to have batteries
Yeah, you have the
specifically work
battery
to your
backup.
house and all the
Yeah.
battery backups and stuff. And I would refuse if I did this in the future, I would refuse to buy the Tesla battery, just out of principle. But there's also there's aid for low and moderate income houses to purchase electric appliances. So things like, like electric stoves and things like that. There's also installation of the heat pump too. There's like, all the peripherals basically. Rebates for retrofitting homes. Households could receive rebates up to $4,000 to install energy saving measures throughout their homes. Tax credits to reduce energy leakage. Boosting efficiency in HUD housing. So the HUD housing got a block, but in the BBB, but there's some efficiency upgrades that could possibly happen. Tax credits for developers to build energy efficient homes.
I thought that was a big one because developers could get 2,500 for each multifamily unit if they use prevailing wages. That seems like a big
It does seem like a lot, doesn't it?
for each unit.
Yeah. It could add up over,
Yeah.
it could add up to, if you're doing 10 units, that's, 2,500 times 10 is
25,000.
100 units. You could get 250. That's still a lot of money.
That's 100 units.
Yeah. My math is not good. There's that. And like you said, the solar panels too, solar systems cost, like you said, around $20,000. So there's a huge savings for getting 30%
One thing I liked about the
off.
solar panels is for people that live in apartments or can't install solar panels on their roofs, there's a program where they could tap into a rooftop solar system or join a community solar farm, yeah. Which is because a lot of these programs are geared towards, most all of them are homeowners and not renters. So, having that as at least one program for renters is yeah.
That's good. One of the things when we talked to Germaine Hulugwa about her book, The Digital City, one of the things that came up was, and I think this is analogous, is that, Comcast would actually want to connect to an apartment building, but then the people in the apartment building were like, well, if we can have just one connection and set up a Wi-Fi and everybody has access to the Wi-Fi, why can't we just pay for one access point? And then the Comcast people or the Google Fiber or whoever else, I think it was Google Fiber, were like, no, you have to have like 10, if you have 10 units, you have to have 10 access points, right? Which doesn't make sense for these buildings. There probably should be some different rate. So I imagine the same with energy or the same with solar panels and those types of things. Like it doesn't make sense to do individual single family home type deals for big buildings because the energy use is different. And also you're not trying to just do one at a time. And you don't have also the infrastructure that's needed to connect all those 10 houses. It's actually because they're already connected, they're pre-connected. So those are the things that I think that are important to think about, especially when it comes to low income housing and affordable housing. I mean, those are important, upgrades to make that could actually save people a lot of money because energy prices are so high generally, especially if you're trying to heat your house in the winter in a cold weather place.
Especially now, yeah.
Yeah, or in the summer trying to cool your house down with the air conditioning. So as climate change comes, it's going to be one way or the other. The cold winters and the hot summers are really going to do a number on people's energy usage. And then there's also $260 million for clean energy tax credits for wind and solar, hydro, renewables, all those things. The companies that are working at, like my friend I was telling you that works on hydrogen. His company actually is a solar company, and so they do industrial scale solar. And I think that they're I've seen the CEO of their company on LinkedIn, very excited about what's going to happen because they're going to be able to do this for PG&E and others when they build their farms. So there's going to be a lot more energy and creation. And so you were talking about the grid and upgrading the grid for electric vehicles and stuff. This is actually going to help them do the wind power, the solar power, the hydroelectric, and the massive projects that are actually going to create this, and not just a single solar panel on the roof.
Yeah, so the issue with the solar and wind farms is the bill requires it lifts the moratorium on offshore wind and wind farms, but then it requires if there is a wind and or solar lease, an offshore oil and gas lease auction must have been held within the past year. And essentially, yeah, it's
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 awful. I didn't see
so
that.
yeah, so the Bureau of Land Management has to put out an auction to auction off like the Gulf, the Alaska, other federal lands to auction off acreage and lease out acreage for gas and natural gas drilling. In order, so you can't have a wind and solar farm lease unless there's the auction for gas and oil.
Well, that's crap.
Yeah.
It should be just the bidder, if we're
Well,
doing the system.
it's
But
not so in or yeah, like you have to the Bureau of Land Management has to auction off at least, enact an auction for at least 60 million acres I think per year, just to do one solar and wind farm. Like that they're connected. So like if the Bureau of Land
this is just on federal land, though, right?
If the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, if they decide that they don't want to have an auction, there cannot be then any solar and wind farm leases. An auction for oil drilling.
They'll have to fix that in the future.
Well, I think it's on purpose. So, but the thing is, like, there's so much land and lease and acreage right now that isn't drilled.
There's so many permits out too that
yeah, there's tons of permits out. I know, like in 20 year was it? There are 96,000 approved permits that are available to drill. 5,000 were approved in 2021. 4,400 are being processed, but none of those are being drilled on right now. And of the 12 million offshore acres under lease today for drilling, 45% is producing oil, and then 55% of that offshore acreage is just sitting there. It's not producing. And all the recent sales that the Bureau of Land Management has enacted since 2017, there's been very few companies that have even expressed interest in taking on new acreage for oil and gas drilling. So, I mean, they at least have to issue the auction for oil and gas drilling to get the solar and wind. But at one point, what if people, the departments decide not to auction off any leases for oil and gas drilling? That will kill any wind and solar farms
on federal lands.
Yeah, on federal lands.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's just kind of they understood better the mechanism than I'm understanding it right now, which is bad. But because I feel like it's probably like the same thing that California does in terms of affordable housing. Like if you have public property, you have to auction it off to affordable houser first, and then you can bid it to, put it, if no houser wants it, then you can auction it off to the highest bidder. But there's a system in place for that. I'm guessing that that's probably the same kind of mechanism they're trying to do, which is like, okay, well, we'll have these oil and gas this public federal land the Bureau of Land Management owns, which is a huge amount in places like Nevada and stuff. But we'll have this land, and then if we're going to allow something to happen on it, we have to open it up to all comers. We can't just be picking and choosing. And so we're opening up this auction to everybody. And if oil gas wants it first, then they can get it. But then after that, we get solar and wind. I don't like it because it feels like we should be trying to like reduce the amount of drilling that we do or the amount of extraction that we do of fossil fuels. But it seems like that's probably the ethos that they were following, I'm guessing.
Well, it seems like, the industry wants to open up more land, even though they're not drilling on the land they have right now. It has
probably want specific land.
Yeah, it's just it has to be at least 60 million acres annually, which is the size of half of California. And the issue is, in order to issue a wind or solar energy lease, they have to have this offer of land for oil and gas leases. So, just the fact that they're tied together, I don't think it's an issue in the Biden administration because they will, I would believe, issue the oil and gas leases so that they can have the wind and solar leases. But if future administrations decide not to do that, that could hold up solar and wind farms.
Let's talk about environmental benefits, shall we? Of the program. Okay, so there's also additional carve out to help reduce heat islands by providing funding to plant trees, establish community urban forests, expand green spaces. This was in the Smart Growth America piece that came out. There's also drought mitigation across the West. There's, I guess, Kristen Cinnamon asked for that too, in addition to her tax breaks for VCs, which is good. That's nice of her. There's also $2.75 billion in grants for other funding for non-federal forest management, including urban and community forestry programs. So one of the things I think is really important that I talked with Michael about in a couple of podcasts ago was just this general idea of environmental services. So using the environment as it exists as producing a good just by existing. And I think that that's an important thing to think about, especially when you're doing forest management or whatever else, because the environment sequesters carbon on its own, and trying to, clear cutting or other things that ruin that actually release more carbon than it actually sequestered. So improved land, quote unquote, improved land that isn't really improvement if it's actually taking away those benefits. So part of this I think is really important to think about is that the natural resource is actually a better resource if it's not extracted than if it is extracted. In a lot of these systems that hopefully the bill will actually allow more of this to happen to save more parts of the environment and leave kind of that fallow to a certain extent rather than extracting it or trying to harvest the goods for a one-time deal rather than a lifetime of benefit.
Yeah, and there's even funding for help with private landowners to ensure that their land is safe from wildfires or just left alone.
Right.
So, I agree. It's like, let nature do its thing and don't mess with it.
Yeah. So there's $20 billion for agricultural conservation and $5 billion for safeguarding forests, according to the Congressional Research Service. So there's a bunch of funding there to actually do just that, to kind of let it go and let it stay. There's also, on the agriculture side, there's also $20 billion for funding for existing federal conservation programs that incentivize farmers and ranchers to embrace climate-friendly practices. So there's that. I've heard some kind of negatives on this, in that some people say that farmers and ranchers are already doing a lot of this stuff, but I don't know if, and it's all kind of carrots and no sticks. So there's that kind of to consider as well, in that, maybe in terms of trying to, because they have to keep their crops coming every year, and so they have to rotate and all those things. So, but there's other measures that can do too, and setting up windbreaks and allowing the fields to go back if they don't have enough to do. Or for example, in California, we should try to stop doing almond groves.
Yeah,
things like
I
that.
was in the almond groves last 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this bill is all carrots. I mean, there's not a lot of sticks. So
Yeah.
Build Back Better had a lot of sticks, but this is a carrot bill. But some of those programs for farmers and ranchers, those were oversubscribed already. So there's interest from the industry to do some of those programs. They just don't have access to the funding. So this is like tripling the funding for.
So hopefully this will open it up. There's $50 million for urban parks too, so that's good. Appreciate that, obviously. So for national parks and public lands, there's $250 million for conservation for the National Park Service. There's ecosystem and habitat restoration for the National Park Service. There's deferred maintenance projects, $200 million, personnel, Fish and Wildlife Service, those types of things, forestry, oceanic and atmospheric administration money for grants for water stuff, $2.6 billion. So there's a lot of stuff in there for that. I think just for me, this section, the most important thing was obviously talking about the environmental services, the natural things, but there's money for all that stuff. And I think that's an important part of, I know that we talk about housing and transportation, all those things, but I think nature, as it were, and trying to keep the temperature of the earth at a reasonable level, this stuff is all important too.
There's also the Green Bank, $27 billion for a clean energy green bank. and 8 billion of that is earmarked for investment in disadvantaged communities. And the Green Bank is leveraging that would leverage investments that the private sector is making already in renewables or climate agricultural products or projects. But I think that's a great program because how much that 27 billion will actually create, it could create double, triple, quadruple that amount of money through incentives. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else? I mean, obviously, there's probably tons more in the bill that we didn't get to, but I think that's a pretty good summation of a lot of the things that we care about, at least.
Yeah. I just the as I was thinking about the bill and like I was talking about some of the work I'm doing at the more local, state and local level, there's so much innovation going on at the state and local level that, can't get lost in this huge grant where there are things that we like about the IRA, things we don't. But like California just is about to pass a bill that would give households $5,000 to not own vehicles.
Yep.
About to pass. Well, hope I'm jinxing myself, like knocking on wood here. AB 20997 that would eliminate parking requirements near transit and affordable housing. I mean, New York City had 136,000 city bike rides last Saturday. I mean, there's just Massachusetts just passed a big climate energy bill.
Yep.
So I think there's just a lot going on to be excited about. And in every study I'm doing, it's like about emissions reductions and tying all the work we're doing to emissions reductions and climate goals. No matter the city, no matter even the location, it's not all West Coast. So I think there's just, a lot that we can think about through all levels of government and the private and public sector to build on.
Thanks for reminding me of that because I do go through a lot of articles every day, as you know, and a lot of it is there's a lot of doom and gloom, and I get sometimes at the end of the day I'm just like, God, this sucks. It's like this is so depressing. Today there's a Washington Post article like 2/3 of Americans are going to live in an area that has 70 days over 100 degrees in the next 50 years or whatever, and I was like, oh my God, like you're killing me. But there are so many people trying to do good things and trying to, meet the moment. There's so many cities around the world that are trying to meet the moment. I mean, there was an article the other day. Brussels is trying to reduce traffic in the city 25%, and Paris is doing so many amazing things. And obviously Japan's been doing some really cool stuff over time. And for all the really upset that Joe Manchin gets about China's natural resources, they are building 250,000 kilometers of high-speed rail and metro and things like that. So there's a lot of really good and electrifying their bus networks. And there's just so much stuff going on around the world.
All the RAISE grants for transit, biking, and walking.
Yeah, there's so much stuff. Yeah, that came out recently, the RAISE grants. So there's, and every day the DOT is coming out with some new stuff from the infrastructure bill too.
Yeah.
I get these bulletins from the communications department at DOT. Hey, tomorrow embargo, blah blah blah. This is happening. Then it's been
so many
happening
grants.
so frequently, right? So there's so much going on.
Colorado is taking $900 million from roads to transit, walking, bike. And that's huge.
Yeah, it's so huge, so huge. And that's actually such a great state DOT action that other DOTs can follow. That they're basically cutting out 2 major freeway expansions, and then, like you said, putting $900 million towards active transportation, and basically changing the paradigm of what the MPO is going to change the paradigm of what a region should do about reducing emissions. And they're hopefully finally figuring out that expanding the roadways forever is never a good solution to their traffic problems. It's not going to help out, and so. Like that you mentioned, that's really good news out of Colorado.
Yeah, I see it every day where cities now have climate goals and emissions reductions, and they need to be climate neutral by this year. And when you're talking with elected officials or like in the planning commissions, you can go back to that and say, well, you have to remove this parking and add this bike lane, or whatever it is, build
Or,
this TOD because you have backup.
or the California HCD comes into San
Oh,
Francisco and
yeah.
says you need to do your permitting
Yeah.
process because you're not building enough housing.
Crazy. Crazy.
That's for another show,
Yeah,
probably.
that's like a whole show on
That's a
itself.
whole show in itself. Awesome. Well, so I think that's as much as we can actually cover today. I
I
think
think we
first,
covered a lot.
I think we covered a lot, and it's a lot of good stuff, a lot of interesting stuff. Hopefully, next time we have a big discussion about a big bill, there's something really even cooler, especially related to active transportation. But for now, we'll take this. Well, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/The Overhead Wire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. Chrissy, did you know that we have new scarves?
I'm still wearing my old one when it's chilly, which is it
That's
has
awesome.
been chilly here. So
That's awesome. Well, I need to get you one of the new ones. Actually, you can give me some opinions. I'm going to show you. Hang on.
okay, let's see them.
So this is the old one, right? You
Yeah.
have this one, this
Yeah,
bus
yeah.
only one. Well, I've got a new bus only one.
Ooh.
I've got a new bus only one that's like a 8-bit. It's the same design, but it's 8-bit, so it's like kind of a bigger and it's thicker, right? So it's for winter wear. It's the same thing. So I've got that one. I've also got a bike only. So we've got the bike only.
Oh,
here.
I like that. Well, also my favorite color is green. So
Are you a green person? So
yeah,
so I got bike only.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you one of these bike only scarf. It's also got the checkerboard. So
Ooh.
in Austin, they actually they have those bus boarding islands that are sticking out. So they put the green checkerboard on there so people can use it as the bike lane and then use it as a bus boarding island when necessary. It's not obviously it's not very heavily used as a bus boarding island. Otherwise, it would be kind of oversubscribed for both bikes and people, but that makes a lot of sense in my mind anyways. It's kind of cool. So I have that, and then I have this one. This is the lightweight one. This is for the Ryans and the Tracys in the Arizonas. So this is actually another bike only scarf with a fading checkerboard, but
I kind of like the difference in the green too.
yeah, it's like that lighter
Yeah.
lighter. It's not quite the Kelly green. It's the more of the what's the material that they use, the thermoplastic that goes onto the streets or whatever. It's more of that kind of that color. So we've got 3 different scarves. Folks can order the scarves now.
So many
Pretty
options.
excited. I know. So exciting. So you can actually order the scarves on theoverheadwire.com right now. I have them in stock. I got a whole big bunch of boxes of them. But also you can be, if you're a $10 a month supporter on Patreon, you can get one as well. And Chrissy, I'll send you one. So yeah, so that's that. And as you all know, also we have an audiobook, Raymond Unwin, Town Planning and Practice from 1909, raymondunwin.com if you want to check that out. So I don't have any listener questions and comments this week. Feel free to write us when you get a chance, theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Puppies and Butterflies is a part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit into other sections. Chrissy, do you have any puppies and butterflies for this week?
Well, I back to traveling, and I do try, at least if I'm local, to take Amtrak whenever I can.
Yeah.
And I've been on Amtrak a lot in the past few months, and I saw that Amtrak ridership is back. It's
Wow.
almost fully recovered pre-pandemic. So
Wow. That's amazing.
I read that today, and I was just like, I see it because my Amtrak trains have been packed. And
Which train are you taking?
I mean, I'm going to Central Valley, so
Oh yeah.
Central Valley, Sacramento, Fresno. The coolest thing was, when you get on Amtrak in San Francisco, you have to go take the bus. I take the bus over to Emeryville,
Right.
and I see so many young kids getting on going to LA, and you have to take bus transfer to the bus.
Yeah, after Bakersfield, you have to
Yeah,
get on the
it's
bus.
like, wow, it's so exciting to see that they're choosing to take Amtrak instead of flying or, driving be along. But
Yeah. Or you can take the Coast Starlight too, right? That goes along the coast too.
Does it go?
I think it goes all the way down, but the one through
takes-
the Central Valley does not.
No, the one through the Central Valley doesn't.
No.
I haven't been on the Coast Starlight, but I've seen it many
Yeah.
times when I'm driving down for fun, not for work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love a good Amtrak trip. I actually, so one time I took, I think it was a little mistake because it was a 4 hour delay that I had to take. But I went to Revolution in Dallas, and then I was like, oh, I'll go visit my friends in Austin. I'll take the Amtrak between Dallas and Austin, the Texas, what was it called? The Texas Star? No, wait, whatever it's called. Or the Texas Eagle is what it was called. And that's a fun trip because you just kind of like go through the center of Texas, and it's really fun to take. But those are good, and I've taken the Cascadia as well between Portland and Seattle. That's fun.
Speaking of Revolution, the last Revolution I went to, I brought my parents. It was in Vancouver, and then they took Amtrak back to San Francisco, and it's
all the way back. Oh, that's a beautiful trip.
They went to Portland, Seattle. You can even do the Crater Lake.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's
nice. Are you going to Revolution this year? In Miami? Bienvenidos a Miami.
I don't I haven't been to like a big conference yet.
I know. I'm a little nervous about it generally, but
there was a recent conference and everyone came back.
Everyone came back with COVID. I know. That's my big worry. But I'm going to be wearing my mask the whole time probably, and my scarf maybe over the top of that.
You can wear all three.
I can wear all three scarves. Yeah, and that'll keep me safe. It'll keep me safe from COVID. Well, I'm triple vaxxed, so hopefully that's means something. And I pandemic be damned. We'll get there eventually. Well, so my puppies and butterflies is just like my daughter started smiling, so this is pretty exciting. She's smiley during the daytime, but not so much at night. At night she's grumpy and is not a big fan of being woken up to eat. Wow. But during the daytime she's super happy to see you, which is good.
So what was her first smile for?
I don't remember. It was kind of like, I think it's a gradual like lead up to the smile, and you can't quite tell that they're doing it for any. And then later on, you can you're like, oh yeah, you're definitely doing it because I'm like making funny noises or things like that. But to start out with, she's like but it just doesn't doesn't quite register where it came from or why. I guess it's called a social smile. So that's pretty positive, especially after a couple months of pretty harsh like kind of, it's almost like Groundhog Day. You like do the same thing every day, and it's kind of weird, but then you get the smiles. It's worth it.
Oh yeah, it's so sweet.
Well, Chrissy, where can folks find you online, or if they want to apply for a job?
Yeah, so on Twitter at Mancini Chrissy. The job posting, I tweeted it out today. It's on my LinkedIn. It's on Walker Consultants. Just look under it's a transit and mobility planner.
Awesome.
So yeah, please reach out to me if you're interested.
I might apply. That sounds fun. It's worth
Jeff, yes. Yeah, I think you should apply, Jeff.
Oh yeah,
that would make it easier.
I wouldn't have time to do the podcast then, or to do the newsletter. Yeah, we always make time. Well, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at TheOverheadWire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for supporting this week's podcast. Thank you, Chrissy, for coming on to talk about this stuff. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Talk